Hi, this is Lucy Sullivan interviewing Cathy Cross on August 17, 2012. So, Cathy, name where and when you received your credentials and where do you currently work?
Well, let's see. 1977 is when I got passed my ABRED EEG board, and I was living in Phoenix at the time, and I took them in two parts. The parts that I passed, I don't even remember where that was. I know that the one part that I failed, I had to take technical again, and that was in San Francisco. In 1984, I got my EP boards, and that was in California, living in Phoenix. Same year, 1984, I passed my sleep APT at the time, boards, and that was also in California. And what was the second part?
Where do you currently work?
All of that part.
Yeah.
I am largely retired. I still do per diem work for Northwest Medical Center in Tucson.
What drew you to EEG and diagnostics?
I graduated from Northern Arizona University in 1972 with a bachelor's degree in art education, and tried to find a teaching job in the Phoenix area, and there were none to be found, big lot of teachers. And so the only other thing I knew how to do, which I learned from my father, who was a veterinarian, was to be a medical assistant, more like receptionist kind of person. And so I looked for any job as a medical secretary. And sure enough, there was one in the paper for two doctors who were neurologists in Phoenix. So I went to work for them doing insurance, medical insurance forms and things like that. And as I was doing that, I saw these reports come in that I had to file that were these EEG reports. And I read them, and it didn't make any sense to me at all. And I asked these two docs, what is this? And they said, why don't you go over to the hospital and just watch, and you can just learn what it's all about and have a better idea. So I went over to Good Samaritan Hospital in Phoenix, which is where they were both reading physicians, and watched EEGs being done, and I was completely blown away. It absolutely amazed me that you could see what the brain was doing in any fashion through these little wires on the head. So I went back over there, and they said, well, what did you think? And I said, I have to do that. I said, you have to teach me how to do that. I have to learn how to do that. And they were like, okay, because they knew they needed techs more than they needed insurance clerks. So I went over to Good Sam, and that was in 1973 by that time. And I had a great tech there, Bev Martin at the time, who was running the lab and had trained at Barrows, St. Joseph's Hospital in Phoenix. So she started like a one-year training program on the job for me, and shortly into my training, she passed away. So that was really devastating. So I did the training for about a year and then left the field to get a different job due to some personnel issues in the lab. And then the two same physicians, called me shortly after that and said, we really need a tech at a different hospital. Would you do that? And would you open the lab? So I was at Phoenix Baptist Hospital for a couple of years, I think it was 75 to 77, and opened that lab, bought the equipment, and set up the whole service there. So that's my non-education. That's my education story, which isn't.
Was EEG a popular specialty when you were starting your career?
I didn't know a single soul who knew about it at all. I certainly, obviously didn't know what it was at all. And popular. It was well respected in the Phoenix area because there was a school at Phoenix, at St. Joseph's Hospital. And so it was well respected, and there were quite a few techs in Phoenix. But as far as people talking about it or knew about it, in friends or anybody, nobody knew what in the world I was doing.
Who were your early mentors?
I read through this question and I thought, oh, that's a hard one because I actually didn't have any. Other than Bev, who only was with me for a short time, it was a very, very lonely educational experience because anything I learned on my own through books. After she passed away, the other texts were not helpful at all. But I would say, Lucy, the one person who influenced me the most. Now, I was fascinated by EEG, and I worked really hard to learn as much as I could on my own. But the person who taught me to absolutely love it and be passionate about it and be completely fascinated and engrossed by it is Brenner, Dr. Richard Brenner. Just his passion just amazed me that to see a physician so excited about something and be just so enthralled with doing it right and learning and continuing to grow, he was a great influence on me.
What were your earliest career influences?
Well, I think I just answered it.
Yeah, right.
So I would just say that he was, again, Dr. Brenner.
If you had not become an EEG technologist, what would you have liked to have done?
Well, my whole goal was to be an art teacher. That's how I started out. So that's what I think I would have done. If I could have, if I had not been so enthusiastically sidetracked out of education, because I had hoped to be a high school art teacher, I probably would have kept pursuing that kind of a job, position, interviewing year after year until I finally landed a job. And I think I would have done a fine job. But EEG neurodiagnostics has been an amazing career for me. I am thrilled with how my life went in the professional sense.
Why do you think this field took off when and how it did?
I think it took off, when I started it was just EEG. That's all we did. And I think when there were a couple of things. The realization, the creation of evoked potentials was real interesting, and there were clinical applications, and but I don't think that created mountains of new jobs or anything. Where it really made a difference was when the utility in the operating room became obvious. That and the whole breakthrough in sleep disorders was amazing. I think those two things really have changed the field.
What equipment did you train on, and what were the main limitations of it?
Well, I trained on some of the early equipment. I did use tubes. We had one machine that was a tube machine, so I know what that's like. That was a grass, and then we used the newer model grass. What do we call those, like solid state or hardwired, or I don't know. I used the grass evoked potential monolithic machine, the Beckman EEG machines, which were horrific. It just broke down constantly. I used Nicolay evoked potential, and Nihon Koden EEG. The only digital I've ever used is the Nihon Koden EEG machine. And limitations, it's funny. The old EEG machines had tremendous limitations as far as versatility, the kind of versatility we have with digital now. But, one of the greatest things they contribute to the technologist was the requirement that you know it inside and out. And I think most older techs will tell you that. You needed to know how the pens moved and what made them move and how to change them and how to punch in a montage if you needed to on the fly. And I don't think they were all bad. Limitations, too, were the ink. Didn't we love that? Limitations, sometimes with the digital machine, I feel like my hands are tied behind my back because you've got to get into the system. You want to look back a few pages. It takes forever to change that screen to go back and look at something that was run, whereas when you have paper, you can just flip back anywhere you wanted to go right now. So, there's good and there's bad.
And we kind of talked about your training, so the next question says, what memories do you have of training? But could you tell me what it was like when you were in Boston?
With grass?
Yep.
It was amazing.
Well, this might be a good chance to talk about, about that.
When I was working at the University of New Mexico Medical Center, actually at the time it was called Bernalillo County Medical Center, I did a paper presentation in San Jose, at the meeting in San Jose, which would have been, 78, 79. And at that meeting, I think it was the first national meeting I'd ever been to. And the grasses were there, and I just was blown away that they were human beings and standing in a booth. And actually, I think it was Ellen was the only one there. And I'd used grass equipment through my whole career. And so I got back, I wrote him a letter, and I wrote him a letter to Albert Grass, and I said, why don't you have any technical people on your staff to call and talk to you? I love your engineers and other people on your staff, but you have no one that's a tech. And he sent me a letter back, and I didn't, before this I didn't even know the man existed. I thought Mrs. Grass was the only person in the company that carried that name. He wrote me a personal letter back and said, that's a great idea. Why don't you come out and interview? So I was like, great. So he flew me to Boston from Albuquerque, and I met he and his wife and John Knott and had dinner with them and met people in the company, and he toured me all over Quincy and Braintree, which was where they manufactured the machines. And I said, I'll take it. I was single at the time, and I was thrilled. And so he created a position for me, which was meeting coordinator. So every time the company went to meetings, which were growing in number by leaps and bounds, I helped get the people there and the equipment and deciding what was going to be used and helped with the displays and a lot of graphic design and so forth. And it was an amazing experience because, contrary to popular belief, Albert Grass ran. It was not Mrs. Grass. She was there, and she was delightful, but he made every decision from what styrofoam cups were purchased to the design of the next low potential machine. I mean, he touched every bit of that business, and quality was everything. So it was a great experience, but for a girl from the West, living on the East Coast was difficult, and people were different, not as friendly and open, and so I only lasted about 14 months before I said I gotta head back out to my country. So it was a great experience, and he was wonderful to work for, and I think the profession misses him and her as well.
What are the main ways in which the field has changed over your career?
Well, I think number one is that we went from just EEG, that's all we did, to all the many facets. Now this career is just wide open, and I think it's growing a lot. It's grown over my career like by leaps and bounds, and that includes, as I mentioned before, intraoperative monitoring, polysomnography, epilepsy monitoring. I mean, the different branches you can take once you have the basics under your belt are just amazing. There's so many, and each one is fascinating. So the multifaceted nature of the profession is, I think, the biggest change. I think another one is a greater focus on an emphasis on education and our options to get it. The number of schools have increased, and the whole online component has just made it so much easier to become well-educated in this field. People still have to make the choice to take advantage of all that, but it's there. When I started, there was one book, Kilo and Oswaldson. That was it. And now it's endless, and I'm really, really pleased about that. one way things have changed too, which I think is almost the downside of what I first said, is that we have so many facets in this profession. I would like to see more cooperation among all the divisions instead of the splintering that we've seen. You know, in growth, some people who have a single focus, such as IOM, choose to separate themselves from the greater family, and I think that's unfortunate. It's a change that I don't think is necessarily a good change. I think if somehow we could have all remained under the same umbrella, the power and the impact our profession could have would have been much greater. And I think it's probably too late to go back there now. I'm sure it is. But that's what I think.
How has scientific knowledge changed the field, and what do you think were the big breakthroughs?
Scientific knowledge, I think the two that come to my mind right away, I've already said, but number one, I mean, when I got started in EEG, sleep research and sleep disorders were just barely breaking the surface. And to think that within my lifetime, just, you know, prior to the onset in the early 70s, we didn't think there was anything going on in sleep. It was like a non-field, a non-discussion. You go to sleep and that's it. It's over. And now we know so much more about what all the different disorders associated with sleep and how to treat them. I mean, that's just huge. That's amazing. And the other one is the treatment, both surgically and with medication for seizure disorders, for epilepsy. I think that's been incredible. I mean, they've done brain surgery to treat seizures since the dark ages. They were very effective. And now with our ability to monitor in the OR and long-term, both in ambulatory settings and in in-house settings, is just changed that treatment completely.
What are the 2 to 3 big issues in EEG that people are working on to solve today?
Well, I think 13 and 14 are kind of similar.
Yep, they are. I agree.
You know, the 3 that come to mind, I dealt with them for 13 years with Asset, and they're still there. And I think number 1 is professionalism, and everything comes out of that. You know, if we are professionals, we should have education requirements. We should have licensure requirements, not just talk about it year after year after year. And it's a very, very hard stand to take, and I know that as well as anybody does. And it disappoints me when I hear people backing off. And by that I mean some of the steps forward Everett was taking, and then they backed off from how I understand things have unfolded. But we just whine about not having the stature we should have, and it's our own fault. It's the fault of our forefathers, of my generation, and hopefully not the generation to come. Hopefully they'll key into that. So that's, this professionalism, which to me is licensure, education requirements. And then the other one is encroachment from other fields, which is kind of an offshoot from licensure. There are people who clue about neurodiagnostics included in their, what's that? What am I trying to think of? In
scope of practice?
Yeah, scope of practice. And because hospitals cut back, they ask someone who does a diagnostic study in a completely different field, well, let's just start doing EEGs now, too. And now we can put a cap on, and it's a digital machine. You turn this button on, and off you go. So that's what I see.
What are you most proud of in your professional life?
I am so blessed in that area to have, number 1, been hired by Asset to serve as education director, and then to be put into that role as the first person to actually have a paid staff role as education director, and to just have the opportunity to begin to organize all the educational efforts out there, both on a national and regional and even state level, to help different organizations to get their education moving and to support their education efforts and to organize assets education efforts. And then also what I was able to do with OSET, the international organization. Because I had the time and assets supported my efforts, I was able to help create a number of different sets of guidelines that were adopted by the international organization to help technologists worldwide. That's pretty amazing. That was really thrilling. And then there's always the people. You know, I met as a department manager when I worked for 10 years at University Medical Center in Tucson, and those people are now boarded and have moved on through their professional careers. And I'm still meeting new green techs at Northwest Medical Center to support that people contact, direct, impact on someone's career has been thrilling, both through asset and through other positions. I think those are the highlights.
Where do you see neurodiagnostics in 10 years?
I would hope to see educational requirements in place and efforts on licensure actually to have a foothold. Maybe Dorothy Gator will finally be our champion and get accomplished in, where's she, Alabama, I think.
Uh-huh.
But, even 10 years sounds like nothing, though. These are huge efforts, and it's going to take a long time to change things. 10 years isn't that long of a time span.
What is the best piece of advice that you have ever received?
Well, I think that was from living with my father, who always said, if you're going to do something, do it well. And I think there are a lot of people who maybe didn't get that lesson early in life and didn't give what they're doing 100%, and then tried to sort of find success without putting their heart into it, and it just doesn't work. I think that would be it. If you're going to do it, just do it well.
That's great advice. And who else do you think we should be talking to? Who should we be interviewing?
I think Brenner.
Yeah, he's on the list.
Oh, good. Good. Because, Lucy, when who we should be talking to, most of the people I would say, unfortunately, have passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And over the years, like we've highlighted Albert Graff in the journal before, and Ellen and John Knott, all of our real people on the forefront in the very beginning we've lost. But the thing with Brenner is I don't know, I haven't talked to him in years, but I think he still has a heart for EEG specifically. And he knows a lot of the history and knew a lot of those people. And
right.
I think his own history is interesting too.
Okay. Okay, great. Let me just turn off the recording here and then I'll be back.